About 72% of Americans have some sort of retirement account, but only 16% of Americans actually contribute to their IRA. I grew up learning nothing about financial literacy, and in 2016 ended up $97,000 in debt. And if someone had told me at the time that I needed to invest for my future, that would have felt near impossible. But I lived like an absolute maniac for 2 years and was able to get completely out of all of that debt by 2018. Once I was done paying off all that debt, I had a coworker that told me I should probably consider investing for my future. And at that point, I did have some additional money, and so I decided to just Google investment accounts and discovered the Roth IRA. That's truly how my investing journey began. Just because I had paid off all of that debt didn't mean that I was financially literate whatsoever. And so I wanted to just be really transparent about what my investing journey has looked like over these last 8 years since I began maxing out my Roth IRA. Because now, fast forward to today, and my wife and I are on track to become tax-free millionaires. In fact, we're actually on track to retire with $5.9 million. Now that $5.9 million is not because we're simply maxing out our Roth IRA. That actually includes some additional investment accounts that I'll talk about later in this video. But really what I want to go through initially is just the 4 main learnings that I had over these last 8 years maxing out this IRA. Why you should be maxing out a Roth IRA, how to actually go about maxing it out, what investments to consider having in your IRA account, and some of the mistakes that I made along the way. Okay, so first let's talk about why you should invest in a Roth IRA. You've probably heard people like Tony Robbins, Dave Ramsey, and many other respected personal finance individuals talk about the importance of maxing out your Roth IRA, but maybe you're wondering why that's the account that they often reference. And personally, I would agree with them. If there was one account that I could pick to build real generational wealth, it would be the Roth IRA. And that's not because it's a complex account or that it's a super exciting account. Really, it's because of one main reason. It lets your money grow for decades without requiring you to pay any taxes on the gains that you make. And that's actually a really big deal. But first, let me just break down what a Roth IRA is. So a Roth IRA is a retirement account where the money that you put into that account, you have already paid taxes on. You invest the money that's in that account, and then when you retire and you pull out the money that's in that account, it's all available to you tax-free. So let's say that you put in $100,000 of your own money, and over time that account grew to $1 million. That means that you would have made $900,000 off of your investments. And you can access that $900,000 without having to pay any taxes on those gains. In comparison, if that money was in some other type of investment account, you would have to pay likely 20 to 30% tax rate on that $900,000, which could easily chop that down to $600,000 or $700,000. This is why people really love the Roth IRA. Now, I don't think that it's necessarily perfect for everybody, but it's really ideal for people that are early or midway into their career, make a middle-class income, are looking for a set-it-and-forget-it style of investing, and are really focusing on long-term gains, which is basically describing everybody in the middle class. There are some restrictions on the account. So you can't touch the money that's in that account until you are 59 and a half. You have a limit to how much money you can actually put into that account each year. Right now, that's $7,500. And technically, if you make too much money, you actually aren't able to invest in that account. You would have to do what's called a backdoor Roth conversion, where you actually put money into a traditional IRA and then immediately convert that to a Roth IRA. It's actually a lot more simple than it sounds. But that would only apply if you are a single individual making over $168,000 or a married couple making over $252,000. Now, all of that sounds well and good, but if you've never invested a dollar in your life, investing $7,500 a year is going to feel really daunting. Again, when I had $97,000 in debt, if someone had told me to go invest $625 a month, there's no way that would have been possible. Which is also why my first recommendation, if you're interested in maxing out your Roth IRA, is to try to get rid of all of your consumer debt. That means auto loans, student loans, credit cards, any sort of personal loans that you have, other than your mortgage. And that's simply because if you're carrying around $1,000 a month in debt payments, it's gonna be really hard to invest anything. That's why 70% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. Additionally, I find it really helpful when it comes to finances to just focus on one habit or one thing at a time, which for me initially was just getting out of debt. It actually really simplified my life. Even though $97,000 in debt is a lot, It made my life feel a little bit easier knowing that I only had to focus on one thing, and that was making as much money as possible so that I could get rid of all my debt. And then over time, I got really good at getting out of debt to the point where I was only spending 50% of my salary. And that allowed me to average spending $3,200 a month on debt, which meant that when my debt was all gone, I now was living way within my means, and I had this additional $3,200 a month that I could invest. Now I know $3,200 a month seems like a lot of money, but for context, I had 5 roommates, I drove a complete junker of a car, and I worked 4 side hustles, which resulted in me basically working every single weekend. And so when I finally did pay off the debt, I actually dropped some of those side hustles and worked slightly less. But I still had enough money to max out my Roth IRA, which in 2018 simply meant being able to invest $458 a month. Now keep in mind, only 36% of Americans actually max out their IRA. And so even if you don't have debt, if you're not able to hit that max contribution limit, that doesn't necessarily make you a failure. What I would start to focus on if you did have no debt is to try to invest 15% of your income. This is a really good rule of thumb for everybody, actually. And it also means that if you're making $50,000 a year, that you would be able to max out your Roth IRA simply by investing 15% of your income. My other recommendation that would help you max out your Roth IRA is simply to set up an automatic contribution to that account as soon as you get paid at the beginning of the month. Oftentimes it's really hard for people to stick to a budget even when they really do make one, because throughout the month things come up and they spend that money. But if you can get into the habit of saving and investing right when you get paid, you reduce your ability to spend that money throughout the month. What a lot of people do instead is they try to save and invest whatever is left over, and so typically there's nothing left over. Now you shouldn't just go invest a bunch of money at the beginning of the month without knowing your budget, because then you might actually not have enough money to pay your bills. What you want to do is write down all the expenses that you're going to be responsible for over the course of the month and actually plan out spending for the month so you know what you could ballpark have left over. And ideally your expenses will be 50 to 60% of your income. That's going to make it a lot easier for you to actually save and invest 15%. And that's simply because it'll allow you to have about 25 or 30% of your money left over to cover emergencies and to enjoy life. Because we shouldn't just spend all of our money on bills and then saving and investing. That'd be a pretty boring life. Remember, we're not day trading here, we're investing for the long term. And now once you have that number that you're comfortable with investing, you're simply gonna log into your account and set an amount and a date of when you contribute based on when you get paid and whatever that number is you decided. But just because you put money into that account doesn't mean you've actually invested it. And so the next step that you're probably wondering is, what do I actually invest that money into? Now, real quick, before I dive into my investments, I just want to say that this is not financial advice. This is just meant to be educational content. So hopefully that means that you can't sue me. Again, I've gotten this question before, so I just want to say it one more time. Just because you put money into the account does not mean that you've invested it. Your Roth IRA is really just a holding place to put the money. Once it's in there, you have to pick an investment that you want that money to go into. I also want to say that right now, as I'm filming this, I'm 34 years old, which means that I'm not going to be planning to touch this money for another 26 years. And so if you're younger, don't worry, your strategy will probably align with mine. But if you're in your 50s, you're probably gonna have a slightly different strategy than I would have. And here's why. If you invest your money into the S&P 500 just for 1 year, there's a 70% likelihood that your money is gonna grow. Now, if you leave it in there for 5 years, that goes up to 80%. 10 years, that goes up to 97%. And after 15 years, there is a 100% likelihood that your money will have gone up. And so if you're in your 20s, if you're in your 30s, or your 40s, well then you're gonna be leaving that money in there for more than 15 years. So it's a safe bet to say that you could put your money into the S&P 500 and it would grow in value. But that doesn't mean that you should just throw your money into individual stocks or into crypto. The likelihood of your money going up that I'm talking about is predicated on you putting your money into the S&P 500. Which is just an index fund that tracks the top 500 companies in the United States. What that means is that you're not investing in one particular company, you're actually investing across all 500 of those companies. Which is why I basically put 100% of my investments into 2 different index funds. One of them is VOO, that's Vanguard's S&P 500 index fund, and the other one is FXAIX, which is Fidelity's S&P 500 index fund. You can pick either of those funds. There's a ton of additional funds out there that track the S&P 500. The key thing that you want to look out for when picking one of these is what the expense ratio is on that fund. The expense ratio is just a fee that you pay the fund in order to be able to invest your money into it. And VU and FXAIX both have super low fees, which is why I like them. Now, I would consider this a slightly more aggressive investing strategy for your retirement account. If you wanted to be less risky, what you could focus on doing is investing in target date funds. This is actually the most common way that people invest for retirement. The name is essentially exactly what it sounds like. You pick a target date of when you plan to actually access that money. And the nice thing about these funds is that they'll actually automatically reallocate your funds across stocks and bonds based on your age. And so as you get older, you'll basically have less of your money invested in stocks and more of your money invested in bonds. Personally, I'd find this a little bit too conservative for someone my age, but again, this is the most common way that people invest for retirement. I do think if you're someone in their 50s, this is probably the right approach for you to be investing for retirement. But if you wanted to be more hands-on, here's a simple strategy that you could use as well. And that's simply that you take 110 and you subtract your age from that. The result is what you would invest into stocks. So let's say that you are currently 50 years old. That would mean that you invest 60% of your money into stocks and 40% into bonds. If you are 55, then you would invest 55% of your money into stocks and 45% into bonds. But I just want to echo, that doesn't mean that you invest in individual stocks. When I'm saying stocks here, I'm referring to various index funds that track grouping of stocks. You could certainly pick some individual stocks. That's not a limitation of the Roth IRA. I personally just wouldn't recommend doing that. But let's talk about some of the mistakes that I made along these 8 years. The first one is one that I've kind of already talked about, which is simply the fact that when I started investing, I just put money into my Roth IRA and I didn't actually invest it. This is something that you just have to remember on your own, is that once you've contributed money, that you also need to set up an additional step of automatic investments. So there's automatic contributions and there's automatic investments. Both of these things need to be set up. And so my recommendation would be to set up an automatic contribution of $625 per month, and then to pick one index fund or a target date fund and have $625 automatically get invested into that fund. The second mistake I made was when I got married in 2020, I was actually investing in a taxable brokerage, but my wife and I hadn't opened up a Roth IRA for her. With the taxable brokerage account, we could invest our money, but the money that we put in there, we paid taxes on, and when we pull money out, we have to pay taxes on the gains. And something to note here is that your partner doesn't even need to be working in order for you to contribute to their IRA. If you're filing taxes jointly, then you could technically use your income to max out their IRA. And the last mistake that I made was not rolling over money that I had invested previously into a 401k plan. An IRA is a self-directed retirement account. What that means is that an IRA, you would open it up, you would manage it, it's always on you. Whereas typically a 401k is set up through your employer, and once you leave that employer, then your employer is no longer actively managing that account for you. You'll either accrue some fees because your employer is no longer covering those fees, or the money will get moved into a holding account automatically where the money is no longer being invested. For me, that's what happened. The money got moved into a holding account, and so it was just sitting there not being invested. And I'd only contributed about $8,000, so really that cost me $3,000 not having that money invested. Not really the end of the world in comparison to $5.9 million, which is my target retirement number. But that being said, if you had been investing in your 401k for 5 or 10 years and you completely forget about it for 5 years, that can actually make a really big impact on your retirement savings. What you want to do, and what I eventually did do, is you want to try to convert that money into a traditional IRA. Now, let me actually talk about how much is in my Roth IRA despite making these mistakes. Since 2018, I have been able to contribute $50,000 into my Roth IRA. Now, I've been super fortunate because over these last 8 years, the market's gone completely insane. And today, now, my IRA is sitting at $96,000. And that means that if I never contributed another dollar, I let it sit invested in S&P 500 index funds, where on average it would go up 7% per year, that money would be worth $589,000 in 26 years when I do retire. But if I just simply continue to max out my Roth IRA, that account will have $1.1 million in it. Now, as I mentioned, my wife and I are on track to retire with $5.9 million. And so let me talk about the additional accounts that we've been investing in and share a little bit about how you could actually replicate this. So the first step is just maxing out your IRA as well as your spouse's Roth IRA. A couple doing this would be able to invest $15,000 per year. Now, I get it, $15,000 a year is a big step up if you're not investing today. You could start with $50 a month, $100 a month. You need to figure out a way to just get started, because over time, you're gonna normalize that. So if it's $50 a month today, eventually you won't even notice that $50 is leaving your account every single month. And then you can add another $50 a month, or $100 a month, or $300 a month, whatever that is. Eventually, you'll get to a point where you will be able to max it out. You just need to start somewhere. Once you've done that, the next step is to max out your 401k and potentially your spouse's 401k as well. The catch here is that unlike the IRA, where your spouse doesn't have to be working to max it out, with a 401k, you both would need to be working in order to do that. My wife and I both work, and so we each have a 401k. My wife is actually self-employed and has a solo 401k, which is something that you can do if you're also self-employed. The maximum that you can contribute to a 401k right now is $24,500 a year. So between a couple, that's $49,000 per year. Now, the catch here is that the money in the 401k, when you do retire, is not available to you tax-free, but you can deduct that $49,000 or however much money that you put into your 401k from your income today to shelter some of the taxes that you'd potentially be paying. After you're able to max out your IRA and your 401k, the next thing that I think families should consider doing is signing up for a high deductible health insurance plan, because that enables you to invest into an HSA, a health savings account. The HSA is the only triple tax advantage account. And what that means is that you can deduct the money that you put into it from your income. The money that is in that account grows tax-free. And if you use the money that's in that account to pay for qualified health expenses, you don't have to pay any taxes on that money as well. Now, the contribution limit on that account for a family is $8,750. I also think that at some point in life, we're all gonna have health expenses, especially later on in life. And so if you have an account with a bunch of money in it that you can use to pay for your healthcare tax-free, that's probably going to be beneficial in your 70s and 80s. And the last thing that I think parents should consider focusing on after that is a 529 plan. This is an education savings plan, and it allows you to invest money instead of saving money for your kids' college, which means that instead of that money not really growing at all, it could grow at a rate of 7%. So the money that's in that account that grows, you don't have to pay taxes on it if you use it for qualified education expenses. Additionally, in 41 states, you can actually deduct some of the money that you contribute to a 529 plan from your income. And then on top of all of this, if your kid doesn't go to college, you can roll over $35,000 into their Roth IRA, which basically gives them a jump start to their retirement. And it would only take about $80 per month to get to that $35,000 number. Altogether, if you did all of this, that would mean investing about $75,000 per year, which I get is a lot of money to be investing, but my wife and I have been on this journey for 8 years. And so this is the first year that we're making it a goal to actually max out all of those accounts. That way we can get the most in tax savings. We currently have $650,000 invested in the market. And if we can invest that $75,000 per year for the next 6 years, even if we just completely stop investing, by the time that we both hit 60, that will now be $5.9 million. Which means that in our 40s, we can basically coast and then just enjoy our money and don't have to worry about saving and investing. And again, I share all this because I was in that spot with $97,000 in debt and never thought that I'd be able to save and invest $75,000 a year. I wasn't even making $75,000 a year at that time. But through consistent habits, through constantly layering in additional steps to invest more money and save more money, I've been able to get here over the course of 8 years. And so if you can build some momentum with your financial journey, you'd be really surprised where it can take you. Leave a comment below if you're in the middle of your financial journey right now. I'd love to hear, what you're working on and what kind of inspiration that you can offer to others that are watching this video.